For thousands of years, the people of ancient Mesopotamia told stories of beings who descend from the heavens, ruled from sacred mountains, and shaped humanity's destiny. In our modern world, we now witness unexplained aerial phenomenon, objects that appear to enter and exit mountains, traverse the skies, and defy conventional understanding. By placing the Sumerian and Mesopotamian epics alongside Zachariah Sitchin's Anunnaki interpretation, we're going to compare these ancient mountain-dwelling gods, kings, etc. to these modern UAP encounters. And when we do, we're going to ask a careful question. Are these stories myth, misunderstood symbolism, or echoes of something humanity has been witnessing for far longer than we realize? Welcome to Chasing the Past. Let's explore the Anunnaki and the current modern UAP phenomenon. Welcome back, guys. It is so good to be here with you today. A lot of things have happened in life, and I'm really grateful for that, both here with you guys and also just in regular life. I know today was supposed to be this, I'm really on to the Bronze Age collapse, and that was where we were kind of going. The Sea Peoples episode is on the way. It's just gotten way more complex, just more detailed than I expected it to be. So, one that I thought was really important with Steven Spielberg's Disclosure Day, right, the new movie coming out with the first teaser. It's the only thing I've been thinking about, actually. And, you know, some of these things in that trailer, I wouldn't say reflect anything, Sumerian or Mesopotamian necessarily, but it has me thinking about these ancient stories. And with those stories come a new way of viewing them, a new way of interpreting them, a new way of, seeing the world around us and trying to explain how humanity has a play in this this cosmic, assortment of infinity. Where do we fit in all of this? And I do like exploring that. And so this one, I really wanted to go down to ancient Sumerian. And, of course, we're going to read a good amount in the beginning about this Zachariah Sitchin interpretation and where I found things that might be off, might be wrong, and where they might actually have a unique match. And kind of go through that and see if we can make this, cool hypothesis of, is this just, some type of symbolic nature? Or did they go to such great lengths in ancient Sumer, Mesopotamian, and then, Babylonian later, to keep the stories, keep the buildings, right? Keep everything intact. What would be a purpose for that? And, I think it'd just be fun. It'd be fun. And I think maybe now with some of the new stuff, with, new jobs moving through, some of these new things that I have to navigate, we're going to go back to maybe doing one detailed episode. And then I think I can get my equipment to maybe live stream some of this stuff. So instead of having to set up a bunch, I can just hit plug and play and then go. But regardless, let's get into the notes, the details. All right, so the piece that we're reading from is some of it's mixed in notes, and then about halfway through, we're going to go through Zachariah Sitchin stuff. But I figured maybe instead of just doing this I'm just going to kind of get a generalization, I kind of want to read it straight through. And so the beginning section is who are these gods and what's the role? What is their job in building this Sumerian civilization? And so in the fertile land, right, which is the Tigris and the Euphrates River, right, we now call it Iraq. So about 6,000 years ago, this society just bloomed with such speed and sophistication that still sparks debate. We call them the Sumerians, and their home Sumer is often called the cradle of civilization. Excuse me. But this cradle might have been rocked by forces that remain profoundly mysterious. So the things that we do get, though, is we get the world's first cities, right? We get, and examples like Uruk. Those are two of them. They built these massive temples, the ziggurats. And I don't think we know exactly how big they are, which I think is interesting. We have just kind of like they got redone or renovated based on how it was like destroyed, and then they built it to where it is now. But we don't actually know, because there's no example, but we don't know how tall it was supposed to be. But what we do know is that from these texts, they were believed to be the stairways to heaven, to their gods. And from there, they would reside up at the top, which is kind of it's very common in the ancient Near East too, is to like have a god that's either landlocked or in a certain place with a certain people, right? I mean, easy one is to go to like Israelites after the Bronze Age collapse. But they invented the wheel. They developed irrigation, complex irrigation too. Then, it was able to take this dry, terrible climate and then turn it into this breadbasket of civilization. And so they gave us the first writing systems, right? Cuneiform, which in itself is kind of cool. Dr. Irving, he was just on Lex Friedman, which is awesome. And he was going through how this language began, and then maybe where we get a little confused. He had kind of I wouldn't say non-scholarship, but more of a hypothesis for how it would have been done. But the idea of writing this into clay and the method with the wedge-shaped marks is just phenomenal. And I do know it also showed up around the same time as like hieroglyphs, right? Egyptian hieroglyphs, and then this writing style showed up at the same time. And the cool part about it is like they weren't just using it to. Sometimes I get caught up in, we have the internet, we have blog posts, we can just write and do whatever we want. It was like, okay, we've invented writing. What do we do with that now? It was legal codes, right? Grain, they wrote down their history, poetry, right? Things that are important to their daily civilization. They needed to have a writing code, and so they made one. And they began to use that they had a good working knowledge of the cosmos, of the stars, and they began to keep track of those. And, they invented their first calendar. The number system was base 60, 60 seconds in a minute, 360 in a circle, right? We use all those things that they invented from like laying down groundwork that later became, Babylonian astrology. And like that alone's amazing, because the Babylonians then were able to like chart the zodiac. And you're like, whoa, all this came from the people before you. And that was a lesson too, was like, are we modern humanity? Are we learning from the people before us? Like, are we learning from the generation of people that came, for me, if I'm an American, so am I learning from the people who came over and started this revolution and built this great place? Not really. Like, I don't, like, none of that really is in my head all the time, or I'm not building upon it. Now, I'm kind of thinking, maybe I should go back into it. You have like Thomas Paine's Age of Reason, or some of these guys who were, my age or a little bit older, who were creating a government, right? Like, there's a lot to be learned from them. And I think maybe the Babylonians understood this, and they were like, what are they working with? What are they doing? And it kind of builds this cool arc for all of these stories to come from, because it's so vast and it's really complex. But now that we're kind of getting a base level of, how much cuneiform we're finding, what we can use it for, what stories are they telling. And we forget that stories are really important to us. Like, humanity needs stories to navigate and to communicate complex ideas, or else we don't learn at all. And so this might be this cool tie-in to how we get a great civilization. But all of the ingenuity of this, the story arc of why they did all this, right, is, and we get to the Anunnaki. So now we're going to go into the Zachariah Sitchin type understanding and see if we can find things that can tie together. But the Anunnaki were the Sumerians. I guess I wouldn't say that. I would say in most, like a textbook maybe, the Anunnaki were the pantheon, the Mesopotamian pantheon. They were these mythological figures that represented the forces of nature. So the sky god is Anu, storm god is Enlil, and the wise water god is Enki, right? So the academics say that these are those metaphors that surround them based on the natural phenomenon that then tie to a physical personification of that natural phenomenon. And so in Assyriology, Anunnaki means princely offspring or offspring of Anu, which would be their chief gods, right? The sky god. And so Sitchin's work proposes the radical idea that these Anunnakis were not gods, but they were biological, even technical beings from another planet, the ancient astronaut theory that you get from his work. And his idea was that the Sumerian tablets, when you read them as history, tell this story. And the story is a detailed story of essentially extraterrestrial contact, which is where we kind of get into this cool later in the episode, how maybe, the new disclosure day could be our disclosure day, how these phenomenon aren't just like a one-off. They've been happening from existence, period. That they've been here, they've done this, we all know what they are. And so instead of being this story of, spiritual guides in a way, it's a population trying to write down the story of cosmic colonists who have specific agendas. And just that idea alone, I find fascinating, which is why we're exploring it. But something that I had to get into was, in this theory, right, the Sumerians, he says they weren't just being poetic. They were describing their gods descending in skyboats or having a terrifying glow called Milam. Or another one I found was Milem, is what it looks like. And so I had to kind of go into that because I want to make sure that that isn't just him taking some words and running with it, which is kind of seems like what is some people have claimed has been happening. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't steering you guys wrong in any direction. But the Milam refers to a terrifying divine aura, radiance, or splendor that covers the gods, heroes, and kings. This signifies their awe-inspiring, sometimes dangerous supernatural power, likely described as fiery or lightning-like. And that would be representing this glory, this fiery, lightning-like glory that can make humans tremble or go blind. Essentially, it was a divine, fearsome radiance. Now, that also sounds a lot like Israelite belief systems, ancient Near East belief systems. And so, this divine aura is the visible manifestation of this being or deity's such power, right? Blinding light or glow. Excuse me. So again, something that I found interesting was the terrifying splendor, right? The fear of God, right? That kind of a deal. Moses cannot look at God, right? So it wasn't just like, oh, it's so bright and pretty. It's overwhelming to your nervous system. Like your body doesn't react to it well. And it inspires such fear in the people who see it, mortals who see it. And in any case, in these stories, it's almost worn. Like you're wearing it that emits something. Or, I don't know, I haven't gotten too deep into that, but, if the gods were, they wore it all the time, or they bestowed it upon people, almost like giving them something to wear, which made them formidable, which again reminds me of the ark, right? A thing that God gives, tells them to build, and puts this thing in there that they can move and bring with them. And it gives them this source of power. And the Sumerian word, it looks like me. But like me, eh. I'm not even going to try. That means divine power. And the lam, or lam, also means like a glow or a heat, almost representing like supernatural essence to it. And so, like, for example, Ishtar describes as bedecked with terror and fearsome radiance, which shows its dual nature. So they clothe it, it's a source of power, and it can be bestowed to a mortal or someone else who's worthy of holding this divine power. And then for the sky boats, so An or Anu in Akkadian was the sky god. And so there isn't a single word that I found that translates directly from sky boats. But in a general use, it does represent, this concept. And so the cuneiform sign for a boat or a ship, it looks like is M-A, ma, often written as giz.ma, gizma. So the GIS, the giz is a wood determinative, so like a wooden thing. And so, I can go there too. So let's just use the example of Inanna here travels in her skyboat to visit Enki, the god of wisdom, to obtain me, the divine decrees from Enki, the wise one. And the boat here is her mode of transport between the heavens, which is, in this story, would be her city, would be the heavens, and Enki's watery realm, which I found interesting with current UAP phenomenon with USOs, submerged objects, unidentified submerged objects. Because Enki is associated with water, and we always assume it means this natural form of like the Tigris and the Euphrates. But also, holy cow, what if it means the ocean? And that kind of got me, the wheels turning a bit. But the crescent moon itself was often like depicted as an icon that represented this celestial boat. And so that carried the sun and the moon over and across the sky. Now, the Akkadian for boat or ship, it looks like Eleppu, E-L-I-P-P-U, or E-L-E-P-P-U, Eleppu. And so that's boat or ship. And so it corresponds to the Sumerian form ma, often written with the wood determinative giz. So giz ma. And so the sign represents both the concept of the boat to the word Akkadian Eleppu. And so it appears in things like Epic of Gilgamesh for a large ceremonial vessel. So we do have this continuation of these skyboats, at least in not a direct word, but at least in translating them down to it. And so the thing that I found, relative, we'll get into the Epic of Gilgamesh story too. There are these skyboats. How do I word this? And they go through or into mountains. So mountains play a big deal in this one too. Now, based on the mountains, that also is a common UAP phenomenon, right? Mount Shasta is a big one. Everyone knows about that one. But there are, we'll get into it later, about 10 minutes or so, but, that is a very common thread too. So the more I'm reading and getting to know these stories, the more I am seeing common UAP phenomenon that relate to, at least textually, what they're talking about. Now, I'm not saying, again, that that's like definitive, like, here's your proof, man. But I am saying it's a very unique hypothesis. And so perhaps they were literally describing what they saw. So maybe the things they see is the hum or the glow of this technology, this ship. And then the ancient myths are just creating this like Elam around the skyboat. The gods were from here. They were at these places and they had this phenomenon. How do we describe it? This is the word you get. So Sitchin's claim is that 450,000 years ago, long before humans, these Anunnaki, led by, he says, a scientist, which you think maybe it was the ancient scientist, the Enki splashed down in the Persian Gulf, and that's where he set up his first base. That first base then becomes Eridu, which is home in the faraway. Faraway. I think. Yes. Okay. I was right. So, to be as clear as possible, I wanted to get into what Eridu means. Does it actually mean that? Turns out, it does. House in faraway built or good city is what it means in Sumerian. So it's symbolizing creation and the first kingdom where kingship descended from heaven. Now, we still get this mythos of from the heavens, which then makes this city the oldest city and the sacred center for Enki, who was wisdom himself and then water. So, very cool connection with the city. So it has, I love that too. The stories tie into themselves in the coolest way. And like I said, I've been reading these a lot, and they do definitely give me a cooler, like, tingly, like curiosity feeling, like, ooh, like when you read Genesis for the first time or something, or the Book of Enoch. But key site this is where the Eridu Genesis comes from, and then also the Iabzu temple is there. And so the consensus is that Eridu is this mythological primordial first city of Sumer, which was central to the creation and flood myths, which were in the Eridu Genesis. Now, wisdom itself lived with Enki, right, the god of wisdom and water. He's the source of kingship and the probable inspiration for the biblical Garden of Eden and Tower of Babel. So this story represents a lost golden age of divine order before humanity's mistake, their fall, and then the Great Flood. And so the key points for this is that Eridu is listed as this first city or origin point in the Sumerian kings list. Now, that's a whole other thing in itself, but it's where the first kings descended from heaven. So to me, that sounds like God's ruled down here rather than, and this isn't in the Sitchin's work, this is in the other notes that I put in, just from looking it up. So the story itself does describe descendants from heaven that then rule this place and then teach them all of these things. And so this creation myth, they were created by the gods and this place. So we're created by them. They create Eridu. It then becomes the dwelling place of the god of wisdom, Enki, and then in his temple, Iabzu. Now, Adapa then becomes this sage who he gains wisdom from Enki, who, again, associated with Eridu, which links to this ability, if you want to think that Adapa was us, or I haven't looked into that yet, but the idea of a sage, maybe a mortal, it reminds me of, we talked about the giving this divine power, this radiance to a mortal being, because they're qualified enough. This sounds a lot like that. And then it links to this profound understanding. So it doesn't even have to be like they told us. Maybe they just gave us the gift or potential to understand, which I think is also a better way of, I like it because it gives a little more power to us, right? Rather than like, oh, thank you so much. Like, what do we do? And they just handle everything, and we're just kind of dum-dums. But in this mythological approach to the Eridu Genesis, you would get all of those things, right? Now, the Sumerian kings list has some discrepancies with time, where some of the earliest kings, first ones, live a long time. So if they're descended from heaven, well, either it's a mistake or they're following tradition or a story. There might be other arguments that I haven't seen yet or looked at. There's probably a ton of arguments around that. But again, a key point here is that this cultural predecessor to Genesis that we all know, it signifies the lost sacred past. So in this past, it was this divine, like, metropolis, a place where we could, receive this information, and we could, learn about culture, build our own culture. We could have kings. We could, get the knowledge from the gods directly. And I think it's funny that it's always before facing some type of divine judgment. And those are usually always this before world, like, era in these stories, whether it's Genesis or, Sumerian or Akkadian or Babylonian, all these, it's always before. And then usually leads to us being, like, corrupt, or maybe we feel some type of way, like the ego might get in the way. But in the story, in Zachariah Sitchin's story, the proposed alternative is that Enki would then create a worker bee. And the plan was to take primitive hominids who lived on the earth, they were evolving, and then we just upgrade them a little bit. Right? So his theory mixes the genes of an Anunnaki male with the egg of a primitive female hominid. And so his interpretation of the Sumerian creation epic, the Atra Hasis, he sees this text as mixing the god's blood with clay, which is in the text, but he uses that as the description of in vitro fertilization. A far stretch, but what else would you call it if you're writing this down as well? Keep that in mind, right? We're going to keep our minds open for this, taking all possibilities. And so after many failures, we'll get back to that in like one sec, they succeeded. The first result then became Adamu, who's the first man, a perfect worker. They were the first Homo sapiens, a slave race created to serve their gods. Now, this paragraph, I think in this video, this paragraph is probably the most important. Because I got curious and I said, how many types of Homo species have we found? Right? Categorized have we found, whether it be in archaeological discoveries and then anthropology. So in the species of Homo, there are estimates ranging from 15 to over 20 distinct species in the human genus, including our own Homo sapiens. Now, we are the sole surviving Homo species. We're the only ones who are still around right now, right? We're the winners. We're the ones who made it. In that story, it says they were the first Homo sapiens, right? Before the flood, before they get rid of all the other nonsense, right? We then become after this slave race, essentially. But also, as the story progresses, we become, I don't know, I wouldn't say the gods, but we become something they didn't anticipate almost. Like something smarter than they thought that we would become. Something better. And so our at least in the modern interpretation, our evolutionary tree is vast, it's complex, it's, no offense, it's not like we were the first ones made and we were perfect, right? Most of these ancient stories have the gods having mess-ups, and then we always get like, the most common one is, of course, the giants. So they're too big. They might be too smart and too big, so we have to get rid of those. They're causing mayhem, right? It's a very common story in there too. But either way, modern interpretation with these stories recognizes there's a diverse family tree that we all share. We're just the ones that made it. We're just the ones that are still here right now. And honestly, it could be more. Like, we just haven't found any, right? So the follow-up question was like, well, then why do these numbers, vary? 15 to 20. Sometime I heard 22 at one point, right? So we have different interpretations of fossils, thinking that might be this one might be that one, right? So with that, we don't have anything to back it up. We have limited evidence. It's very hard to find a few of these fossils. So it's just limited in its scope. And then, of course, like I said before, some people want to combine like Homo erectus, and they go, oh, wait, but I think it's Homo ergaster, Ergaster. It's another type that looks very, very similar or is similar, so there's some debate between that. So that's where you get 15 to 20. Either way, still a diverse lumping of different Homo species. So it also means we are the ones that made it after all of these tests until, boom, just like that paragraph, you get us. We're the thing that made it, just like in the story. And I know this word might get complex with slave. And it's, again, just by our own standards of what we've done in history around this word, it's not good. Now, something that I found interesting is that in the Bible, both in the Old and New Testament, slave actually isn't as a faithful individual, right? So it reminds me of Paul, to be honest with you. Paul introduces himself a lot as a slave of Christ Jesus, right? And that word is doulos in Greek. It appears 100 times in the New Testament and is translated as slave or bondservant in more accurate translations, more modern interpretations. So they used to just be called servant in the older versions like King James, but that would not be accurate. So I want to be accurate. They are saying slave or bondservant in the New Testament. Old Testament, kind of amping it up here, it's mentioned 1,100 times. And that word looks like Eved, E-V-E-D, the Hebrew word, right? And it is the basic word for slave or bondservant. So it's used, both of them are used to describe faithful individuals who are slaves to God or slaves to Christ Jesus in Paul's case. And so it goes from Old Testament to New Testament as slave. So it's not like, oh, see, we're just nothing compared to the gods. Well, it's in all these texts. So slave was a very common way to describe a faithful individual in that religious structure, I guess you would say. But anyway, I thought those two were key important things because they both combine with that story in a way that does make sense to me and how it would last over all of this time. We could kind of put it together. Anyway, back into this, Zachariah Sitchin type. So his idea is that for a while this plan worked, but tensions got bad. So then the commander in Lil, right, this strict leader who only saw human beings as like tools to be used, Enki goes, I don't know, I made them. I'm kind of fond of them. And so he gave them the ability to procreate. So, that's fine. So it means that he gave us the ability to like control our own destiny in a way, in this metaphorical sense. But population exploded. To Enlil, the noise began to bother Enlil specifically, right? So we got too noisy. Maybe we were hey, we can be just like you guys, teach us this, right? Maybe we just became an annoyance. Too big of a problem. Oh, are you home? Hi. Now, in this story, the breaking point, so the theory goes, is that Nibiru, this the planet, it says Nibiru is this planet, it's far out there, where everyone knows. So the next pass was its gravity was predicted to cause a global tsunami, which would be the reflective of this great flood. So Enlil saw this as a chance to wipe humanity out. So Enki secretly warned a human king, Ziusudra, who would become the Noah figure, and then gave him instructions to build this boat to survive. Super cool. Dr. Irving Finkel and some people were able to build this thing, and it's an awesome documentary. And just the idea that it could be done. So the only problem was the bitumen that was used both in this, they're mentioned in the story, but used in real life, was not really good. So there were some holes. But it floated, it moved, and it did work. And it's huge inside, but it looks like a giant floating donut. But So in there, it's a boat with a description. It was built. It works. The theory here is that he says it's a submarine, which is the detail that's not found in the myth. No mention of anything underwater, nothing. It describes a boat. So that falls apart. So he did take that out of context, to be fair. So from this flood myth and everything being gone, the Anunnaki then decided they would rebuild civilization. And then from the surviving, it looks like gathered population in his idea, those were the elevated humans who then now became partners rather than slaves. Maybe the ones that earned, the Elam or the glow, whatever you want to call it. But so then they refounded the cities of Sumer, ruled as gods themselves among men. Then this would be that grand narrative, which is this creation, conflict, and cataclysm that would reset the world. And, it's that classic ancient astronauts, which is a cool, the idea to write a book on it, very smart. Very smart. It's a good basis. Now, after that's all done, I dove into Gilgamesh a bit, because this is where we tie in the UAP. I know we're kind of far in, but in tying this, I think it is important because in Gilgamesh, he does travel. In his stories, he travels to a landing place. That's specific, a landing place. It's guarded. So Zachariah Sitchin says it's a terrifying mechanical being. I could not find the mechanical part, but I did find something that was called the Scorpion Men. I'm not even going to try to attempt those words, but they are described as terrifying divine guardians from the Mesopotamian mythology in the Epic of Gilgamesh, who guard the twin peaks mountain Mashu, which is the gateway to the underworld and the rising sun for the god Shamash. Shamash? It looks like Shamash. So their role, these Scorpion Men, is to guard this mountain, which allows the sun god to pass through the mountains daily. Key figure here, again, as we work through it, UAP phenomenon revolves around mountains, flying in and out of mountains all the time. These Scorpion Men might be a key, boundary. They might represent some type of boundary between the regular mortals and other divine realms, or this divine place, right? So I put down their themes of protection, transformation, and in this story, it's a journey into darkness and then rebirth, but all revolving around this mountain and the ones that guard such mountain from regular people. Now, Gilgamesh is the only one that can get in because he has a divine lineage. Another common thread in most ancient stories, even the ones that we love so much, like the demigods of Greek. So he is 2/3 god and 1/3 human. So he's able to open the gate, which is allowing him to pass into the garden of the gods in this story. So in this story, we have the ones before, right? The creation story. We have this entire Anunnaki play. But then we also have a weird thing where Gilgamesh, who is a recognized real king, at least in textual evidence, but in the stories, they give him these like grand adventures where he has this divine lineage and power that can do things others cannot. And it allows him to go to where the gods are at. Well, where do they reside? So I had to look up what is Mount Mashu, or Mishu, with an I instead of an A. And this, how do I put this? I'm trying to keep you interested by not just saying mythology or blah, 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 or mythological, because it kind of dwindles it down a bit. But just roll with this cosmic formation, this mythological cosmic location that is this idea rather than a confirmed place as a twin peak mountain that is at the end of the earth, right, where the sun rises and then sets, and it acts as this gateway to the land of the gods and the underworld, and it's just so vast and big. So it's a cosmic gateway. So in the mythological story, it is a cosmic gateway that rises and sets with the sun, but the peaks are the banks of heaven. So like heaven has a limit, or heaven has a place that has boundaries. And so then the roots from that boundary also go to the underworld. So they also go down. So it's not just like a big giant place. It's also a deep layered place, I guess I would say. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked on it, but we'll just keep it simple because we got a lot here to go through still, and it's getting kind of long in the video. But so the location of paradise is here, right? So Gilgamesh emerges into this marvelous garden of the gods, which is the paradise with trees bearing jewel-like fruit, which I thought was a key detail. Like, whoa, jewels are just hanging out. Sounds like it's underground, to be honest. But and it takes 12 double-hour journey. So it's that, what's that, 24 hours. So it takes them an entire day to get through the tunnel. Oh, get through the tunnel. I didn't even know that was in that story or in my notes. Makes sense. So I had to see if there were other tie-ins, which would be speculation on this location. If this is a real place and they're using it as a geographical point for their story. So some of these suggest that it could be the Armenian Taurus mountain range, which is south of Lake Van, and possibly, but kind of near the sources of the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Now, Lake Van has become important. I think, Matthew LaCroix is doing a lot of work. I think his documentary is out. So if somehow you find this video and get to this point about Lake Van, I'm excited to see what he has found. Because underneath Lake Van, there is a lot of ancient structures, symbols, and things from a much older time that he tracked down, he set up a team for, and he is able to not excavate anything, but see what's under there. So the idea that this mountain that might have phenomenon around it is also tied to this Lake Van area that Matthew LaCroix has been done great work on for the last couple of years. I've watched him thoroughly. Would love to talk to you as well sometime. I think you're great. And doing a lot of good work in this space too. But the archetype, I think the key point here is the archetype of this sacred, hidden, portal-like mountains, right? So it appears in these ancient myths and then also these contemporary UAP reports. And so it at least at the minimum we all share a fascination with this high, mysterious, elevated place with some otherworldly connection. And in these stories, they're more than just geological, right? These mountains themselves, they're powerful spiritual portals with the ability to, navigate the cosmos and allow for specific transformation and specific encounters with human beings and the divine. I think that's a pretty important link in this entire thing. What is the thing that defines, that piques curiosity to the point where we have absolutely no idea? Probably UAP phenomenon. What's the tying point between that and these stories? It's the geographical link, right? It's the thing that they're looking at are the mountains. So we'll try to, I have a lot of notes in here about it, but I'll try not to get too deep. So I'll just pick some of them, right? So there is a mountain. So there's Mount Ararat in Turkey, right? Being the traditional later identified site. And there's Mount Nasir, which is in northern Assyria. So the mountains of Ararat refer to the Armenian highlands. And so there may be this geographical link close enough to suggest maybe there's a regional narrative there. And so Mount Nasir is in northern Iraq. So it's the Zagros Mountains. It's the region known for its mountainous terrain and, again, historical significance. Ararat is in Turkey. So it's between Armenia and Iran. And it's the highest peak in the country. So in the story, right, after the flood, in this case it'd be Untapishtim in this story, but he earns immortality after the deal is made to never flood the world again. And so this is the blessing that he gets. He earns immortality, and that is who Gilgamesh goes to communicate with. And, the link I want to keep exploring as we dive deeper, we keep going. Is there a way that we can identify these mountains in the search for UAP evidence and see if there's a tie-in to maybe both of them with story and with the modern phenomenon? I don't know, but it is an interesting hypothesis that I wanted to share and explore with you guys. So I guess I can end there. It's already pretty long. I got to edit this thing. But so when these texts speak about, gods descending from the sky and retreating into the mountains, I think it's important to remember that to them this wasn't fiction. It was like a sacred memory. They were preserving something sacred, something important to them. And so whether, Zachariah Sitchins and the Anunnaki are, made up, or this is the story itself in the text are symbolic, or in our current modern era, it's misunderstood technology, something that defies our current framework of understanding. The important part of this is that it's not about belief, but about curiosity. We are all curious on what it is. How do we understand it? And I think across all of human civilization, we've looked for something, whether it's looking up, looking in ourselves, right? We're trying to understand like our place in the cosmos. And these ancient stories echo and resonate today because these modern sightings of the phenomenon also don't. We're not satisfied with them, right? We're not satisfied with the I don't knows. So we have to, take something out of this mystery. And maybe in doing that, we share these ties, maybe not even necessarily linguistically, but we all have a tendency to describe it, to write it a certain way, or label it a certain way. And I think the key part about it is to stay curious, right? Not get locked into something that's, just straight belief, which is fine. You can believe whatever you want, but stay curious. Let the stories that we, tell ourselves, shape who we become. And I think that's important. So thanks for being here to explore this. Until next time, keep asking, keep questioning, and above all, keep seeking. Bye, guys.